Don't tick the tap off.
That was one of the weaker can openings we've had in a while. I blame the liquid death.
It's all an effect of the solar eclipse that happened a few hours ago.
You know, I was thinking before we started how I was going to start it, and I was like, the joke is we always talk about the weather in the beginning of these things, but I
This
feel
is a
like
good day to talk
I was
about
getting
the
ready to
weather.
say today feels like a pretty good exception to that. Just, it's something. What's it? 20 years when the next one will happen? I think full one somewhere.
I think at least in the continental United States, I looked up a stat that says that solar eclipses happen a full solar eclipse happens every 18 months.
It
Just
could be
depends
in
on
different
where
parts
you
of the
are.
planet, though, like depending on where you are on the Earth. And there was one here, a partial one, in like 7 years ago or something. All right, but that's enough.
Did see some people looking at it today through binoculars, which was
A bold. Well,
mind-boggling.
what if it had shade lenses on it? They could have prepared.
That's still a bold decision.
All right, enough weather. Welcome everyone to the Aged Out Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Fantini, and with me, as always, is
Evan Worrell.
And before we jump into today's designer breakdown with some of the United Percussion design team, comment, like, subscribe on YouTube, or check the podcast out on podcast services. Go to the other one depending on whichever one you're listening or watching on. Facebook, Instagram, never miss an update, and Patreon.com. /Aged Out Podcast, or hit the join button right here on YouTube if you want to support us financially at all. But we appreciate the viewership no matter what, and that's what we appreciate above anything else. All right, Evan, take it away.
Yeah, so as you can see from the title, we have been graciously given some time from the United design team. Some of them we'll touch on the people that we're missing here in just a second. But we'll start right off with Mr. Alex Beltran. Am I saying that correctly?
Beltran.
Beltran. Oh, okay.
Beltran, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, man, Alex, just tell us a little bit about what you do with United, how long you've been with the group, a little bit else about yourself if you want to throw in a tidbit, a fun factoid or anything.
Awesome. Yeah, well, first of all, thank you guys again so much for having us on. We're just so excited to talk about the show. My name is Alex Beltran. I've been the battery arranger for United Percussion since the 2020 season, and I'm in my second year as the director of the program, so kind of taking over a little bit more of the reins with an awesome, great team of people.
Sick. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but I do think you guys have a fun little kind of calling card that you've done over the last few seasons. That'll lead us into kind of your, I don't want to say musical counterpart, but co-part here, Mr. Iain Moyer. What's up, Iain?
Hey, how we doing, everybody? Thank you, Evan and Mike, for having us here. Yeah, my name's Iain Moyer. I'm the front ensemble orchestrator with United Percussion. I've been with or around the group really since 2017 in sort of a consultant and advisory role, and happy to kind of take on a new role here with the team as a front ensemble orchestrator, working with the rest of the designers. So,
yeah, and you guys, you and Alex at least, I don't know, you all work full circle fall, winter, right?
Yes,
pretty much.
Yeah, we're
nice.
Alex and I are together quite often, so spend a lot of time together with Boston Crusaders, obviously, and now we're doing the United project together. So
consistency is key.
Yeah,
heck yeah. And then we'll hop over to Mr. Tony Lyman. What's up, Tony?
Hello. Thank you so much for having us here. And my name is Tony Lyman. This is year one for me at United. I am the sound designer and just kind of overall show design assist to help bring the show to life. And it's been an honor to be a part of the process and bring some different things to the table that they requested. And, I've known Mr. Beltran. I've known him for a while back, getting his assistance at Petal High School, where I spent a good chunk of my life. And Iain Moyer, we've been slugging it out, seeing each other here and there, but we've never had the opportunity to work together until now. So this is kind of a dream come true for me to be able to collaborate with these guys.
Very cool.
So is this your first go with an independent world ensemble? I know Petal's competed Elastic World.
Actually, my independent world, I helped out at Pulse Percussion, doing some set design stuff. So like the Little Boxes show, the Warped show, the Brothers show, Uninvited, all of those set designs. I collaborated with John Mapes on that, who who I actually, am a design student of. I brought him on in 2010 at Petal High School to help me, develop my design skills, and out of that we started working together on various projects, and you know, so
Nice.
this is a cool evolution because I consider myself kind of an East Coast guy. Even though I'm from the South, all of my lineage and the people who taught me and influenced me are basically East Coast. So it's kind of a natural working relationship with these guys.
I love that. I mean, as we were kind of all talking before, off the record, before we started, Fantini and I both have kind of like a affinity for East Coast too, just from our drumming family tree. Also, a side note, and then we'll get into full on United talk. But the 2017 Pulse show, that closer moment, building up into like that. I think it was the Alanis Morissette song on my high list of WGI moments in history. But that was a good one. But yeah, we wanted to bring you guys on and just, selfishly dig in more for ourselves about your show, and then also give you guys the opportunity to share about your passion project for this season. So yeah, the show title is, I don't want to get this wrong because I have gotten it wrong, The Shape of Things to Come. So Alex, kind of start us off. Tell us a little bit, like, where was the inspiration from? How did it develop into what it is now? Who had maybe some of the original thoughts and how it evolved?
Yeah, of course. So I think I'd be really remiss if we didn't also mention Chad Moore. He was the director of United before me. He's really kind of our artistic director. He's still very involved in our design and our process and helping curate and bring together a lot of these ideas. So when we first started meeting to think about what we wanted to put together for this year, with this little bit newer team. Oh, and before I forget, one other person I really want to make sure we mention here is Iain Hale. I know Moyer mentioned he is the front ensemble orchestrator, but Iain Hale is also incredibly involved with our music program and helping us kind of work through what we do and put together. But when we first started talking as this new team, we started really kind of thinking about things that we were inspired by, and maybe things that have helped us kind of grow as people. And we kept on circling back to this activity, whether it's indoor, or if it's outdoor, if it's pageantry, or anything that's kind of related to this world that you guys talk so awesomely about and that we all partake in. We were just thinking about how we were shaped by it. And Chad had a really interesting thought to try and craft a show that would be a celebration of how this activity and this medium has shaped us as designers and as people and creatively, but more specifically, like the actual members that are involved, that are creating these experiences, are the ones that are really out there doing it. So that was kind of like the seed of where we started. Can we celebrate how we're shaped by these experiences that we have and the time that we spend together and the music that we play and the visual that we do, but really all the other things that go into this crazy experience together. So that was really the birth of the show. And from there, we kind of talked through some specific, I'm sure we'll get in the weeds a lot more of like thinking, okay, well, this can be about this specific thing that shapes us, or this or that, and going through. But at its core, it's a celebration of the activity and what's shaped us, and specifically what's shaping our members into the people that they're going to be after they're done.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I watched the show, I took notes. There's some vocals in there that we'll get into that help, guide us through the progress of the show too, and the program. So then, Iain, going from that, and you guys kind of have this show concept and an idea, do you all then sit down and start picking out music or colors or visual ideas? And, we'll also take that time to shout out Jamie Hawley, who's the visual designer. I'm sure a lot of people know Jamie's name, designs and works with the Blue Devils, has written there for years. But do you guys have the concept, and then you're like, all right, now do we just start dropping in the hat musical ideas or things that we think align with this, or trying to create a certain vibe, kind of take us through that next step of curating material?
Sure. Yeah, I think what was interesting about this show, like maybe the first design meeting that we had, we were really talking about what are we going to do for a show. Like, there was a bunch of slides in like a Google Doc, and I'm going to be honest, we didn't make it past like slide one. Slide one was the shape of things to come, and it's like we kept talking about it and kept talking about it. It's like, okay, I guess the decision's made here. Like we're gonna do this one, and I think it just felt right from a lot of from a lot of different things, from a musical standpoint, from a visual standpoint, obviously, which is a huge component of our activity and so on. And then I think once we sort of all kind of liked a concept, we did have a meeting in early September, and we started just throwing out some musical ideas. And I think there were some things that were like, oh my gosh, we love that. And there was some things like, maybe we pass on that and so on. So I think that was kind of step two, was like, okay, we have this concept, and let's talk about some of the music. I'll take it from the musical perspective. Like, let's talk about some of the music that could go with that. And we quickly got on to like "Shape of My Heart" and "Fragile" from Sting. Things that had some very visual components in their titles, but also drawn to some Oppenheimer music, drawn to some of Andy Akiho's music, and so on with "To Walk or Run" in West Harlem. And we really kind of found a few things really pretty quickly. And I think the last part of our show is "First Circle" by Pat Metheny, and that kind of came to us last. But it was also like, as soon as we were like, oh yeah, let's do "First Circle," like let's finish the show with that. There wasn't a lot of thinking once the ideas were generated, which I think was a lot of fun. And I'm not saying it doesn't always happen that way, but this one felt pretty easy to put together. I certainly want to hear what Tony has to say about that too, but it definitely felt like, okay, here we go, let's go.
It's got to be nice when the pieces fall into place like that from a design standpoint, because I'm sure everyone's been in situations or scenarios where they had an idea, maybe the musical selections they thought would work aren't panning out, but it's got to be a huge relief early on when you pick a show and you're like, oh, that piece will work perfectly here, this will work great here, and it just kind of all just comes together for everything.
Yeah, we'll hop over to Tony, and I want him to expand, like you said. But for the fall program, the high school I work with, when usually each year we have like, all right, everybody pick your top 3, and we'll like develop these. But everybody just keeps circling back to like the same one. You're like, all right, why are we fighting upstream here? Let's just ride this raft. But yeah, Tony, I'll let you expand on what Iain kind of just crafted there.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with his assessment of that. Was I was aware it was my first time to be on the team, so I kind of came with some shows in the chamber. I was ready to go. And then Chad throws up this slide, "Shape of Things to Come," and I just kind of sat there in silence. I was like Homer Simpson backing into the bushes. That meme. I was like, that's the show. I was like, we should talk about nothing else. That "Shape of Things to Come," the graphic that he put up, and just saying that out loud felt right immediately. And I think that resonated with the entire team immediately, which led directly into the deluge of ideas. And to me, that's the mark of a great show, is when you have so many ideas that you're putting effort into which ones won't make it into the show. Mm-hmm. That's when you're on to something. So it felt very organic, and it didn't feel like we were trying to force things to happen. It was more that we were sculpting the idea. No pun intended, but it was kind of cool to hear Iain recount that, because I haven't revisited that in my mind until he was saying it.
So you just mentioned too, and we'll stay on that thought real quick, about you're coming up with so many moments and you got to pick and choose. Is that kind of what happens next in the process of like, all right, this is a moment. Now let's try to figure out an order and a structure of what we want to happen first, and then how we want to end? Or how do you come up? Do you work back to front, end to end, and then kind of fill in the gaps of the Oreo in the middle? What was that next step in organizing this brainchild?
To me, I think the answer to that question is yes.
All of the above.
Yeah, it's for me personally, I try to get a mental picture of what the product is going to be. And I tend to see entire things in their entirety. And that may not necessarily be that it's this piece or this piece or that piece, but I know how it feels and how I would like for the audience to respond to what I'm trying to say with that show. And to me, that was the place that we needed to get to with this, was what do we want the audience to come away from this experience feeling like? And then that informs the path of how we got there. And it seemed like that was the exact path that we took from there. Was just we want this show to be an art piece. If you if you will go into an art gallery and this piece could come to life and play out over 7.5 minutes, it would be this show. And from there, we plan the path.
Heck yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yep.
Or just like a frame of reference to latch onto. Yeah,
I'll jump
Mike.
in just big picture from what you just said. Interesting, you used the word art a lot in what you just talked about, and other design teams we've talked to so far this year have also said the same thing. I feel like I'd be interested to hear your all's opinions on this, kind of stepping away from this year's show for a second here, that the activity really has shifted more towards the approach of we're creating art instead of a drums in a gym show. Is that your all's impression as well? Like, I feel like way more people are talking about, this is an artistic concept, we're visualizing it, putting audio to it, and making more of an artistic creation. Because, I mean, I'm sure I don't know, I just feel like it's gotten a lot more ethereal or ambiguous. Maybe that's the wrong word there. Esoteric's a good way to put it. Just the approach is way less concrete and more removed from that concreteness a little bit in the design. Is that just
I think
you think so?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, without going into like a giant history tangent, but I think I think the venue plays such a huge part in that too. Like for as big as UD is, and obviously it's the biggest place that almost all groups get to perform in, it's still a really pretty intimate experience.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about like a little smaller group of performers and you have this total customization, like I think that's something that's been really interesting watching all these different groups over the couple of years. Like everyone's really working to try and make the space of UD Arena theirs for 8 minutes, and whatever that is, if that's visually, if that's musically, it's this constantly shifting thing. And I think that's what's been pushing a lot of people to like, how can we make UD Arena not feel like UD Arena for this amount of time, and what does it take for us to do that? And regardless of it's this style versus that or this or that, like that's something that's been really inspiring. It's certainly for me, but I think for a lot of people, instead of just trying to put something technically out there or anything like that, it's like, can we change the space for 8 minutes and then run away really fast so the next
and then the time stops and then go immediately break.
Well, what you both said, Tony and Alex, just there too, about like, Tony, you mentioned, how do I want the audience to feel? I think when shows can break down that like wall between spectator and performer and create an immersive environment, and the show connects, that's when you create moments like what Alex is just talking about, where you are connecting. It's no longer in UD, you've transported somewhere else. So I think that the medium, what we do, what you guys do in design for, and what we watch and consume as spectators has shifted from the drums in a gym, because also that's really the only way you can innovate, I would say, too, just because, if you're doing drums in a gym, you're limited. Right. So
I think it's the natural progression of the activity.
Yeah, designers are getting better. Designers are getting more mature. The activity's what? Not even 25? Well, the 90s if you count it, but wasn't
30s,
90s.
30.
So fine, even 30 years, short window.
Right.
It's really, in the grand scheme of things, a blip of history.
Right.
It's very young activity still.
Yeah, and I think when you start dealing with people who are in this activity that are some of the highest minds and the most intelligent and artistic people in their own idiom, like, if you're a marimbist or snare drummer or whatever your musical creative, wherever that genesis of your musical offering started from, when you go into the design domain, it's not like you can contain that. and getting the opportunity to create these shows year after year and learning and having this environment. And something that we do that's different from, let's say, Broadway or even a rock concert is we're playing to an informed and intelligent audience. These aren't just randos that walk into UD Arena going, read it in the paper and said, "Oh, let's go see what's happening in there with the drum thing." We, for better or for worse, we are our own audience. And so that yields a next generation of designers or even more who start where the thing left off in their design career. So it's an exponential growth artistically, and we're just seeing the fruits of that. I just hope that the infrastructure of the resources can keep up with it. That's what concerns me the most.
Yeah, I had never thought about that actually. The pressure to innovate and push forward and always evolve is because we are a self-contained activity mostly. There's a high barrier to entry to appreciate this. Whereas if you go see Shania Twain or 50 Cent or somebody perform, like anyone that doesn't have musical, it doesn't require a level of understanding to I guess go enjoy it. But everybody in that audience,
or even within the same activity, like when it came out, how many of us were sent clips from the movie Drumline? Everybody's like, "This is awesome." We're like,
"Yes,
it is awesome." Yeah, this style is. Yeah, you're right. It's enjoyable.
Fun fact: that movie is one of the big reasons I got into Drumline. Not gonna lie.
I mean, at some point, like we can be a little bit on a high horse and roll. You're like, "Oh my gosh, like what they did." Like, but that style of drumming is enjoyable.
Yeah,
and that what they do is great.
Yep.
I'll reroute us a little bit back into like the actual Shape of You. The show starts off, and hopefully I get these quotes right because I was on a YouTube video, so the audio, but it starts off, the world, much like shapes, molds us into the individuals we become. It's kind of talking about how culture has as much of an impact on us as genetics and hereditary things. Like that's what I got away from it. And all the members, as far as the battery on the floor, have these individual shapes of glass. They're all kind of personalized. And then it starts off with this kind of, like you said, Mike, ethereal front ensemble moment. There's a lot of metallic stuff happening, the bowing of the vibes, kind of pitch bending. So like, Iain, kind of take us through that, what your mindset was when you started crafting this moment.
Sure. I think it's interesting. I think we all have like bucket list pieces that we want to do, and we want to arrange. And so there's a piece called The 8 Postludes by Elliot Cole, which are for vibraphone. It's basically 4 people standing around one vibraphone, each with a bow or 2 bows, and playing it very non-traditionally, usually not with mallets, sometimes with fingers, and oftentimes with bows and so on. So, it was kind of a bucket list piece that I always wanted to do. And it just seemed like when we started talking about the show and really starting it from nothing and really starting it from the floor and trying to rise up from there, I felt I kind of reached out to the design team and said, "Hey, let's check out like one of these pieces. This could be a really interesting thing to do." And I think one of the cool things, vibraphone, it's a very tricky instrument because outside, like in marching band or drum corps, it's a little bit tricky. It can get lost. But I think at times, if it's not played and written for and mic'd appropriately, but inside, like solo vibraphone, you can really, really appreciate, And we're very lucky. Pearl Adams, we've got some 4-octave vibraphones with, motors and so on. So we're able to like really do something somewhat unique. You might see like on a percussion ensemble concert. We're kind of be able to kind of start the show in this very still way, but through some literature that's out there percussion ensemble wise. So it was kind of a bucket list piece for me, and we were able to kind of put it, I think, appropriately into the show. I don't think it's like forced in there per se, but I think it was appropriate for our needs, for the narrative and what we were trying to do for the aesthetic at the beginning.
There's also a couple of cool audio visual like lineups. You talk about the bows and the vibraphone, and it is, you talk the motors and stuff. It's one of the more resonant, like front ensemble instruments that you have available. And there is that quote too: "Within these shapes, discover the hidden resonance of ourselves." So you kind of have that like thematic and also musical cohesive moment that's happening as an additional layer. And then it takes a while. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Evan. I think one other thing on the vibraphone, the opening that was really special for us to work out visually was just percussion is such a visual medium. You guys know it's like how the sticking pattern affects the
Hmm.
body and the inflection. But we were also really inspired by the act of like bowing the vibes and what that's like to stretch and what that kind of looks like. And if you're looking on the floor a little bit too, part of what the visual representation is inspired by the lengthening, the pulling, and the pushing of what it's like to do on a vibraphone. And I thought that lent us some really interesting visual opportunities too.
So really, the goal of that opening, because it is a front moment, like we've said, the marching part of the ensemble doesn't have instruments on. It's more of like a body moment, and so the goal there, from a design standpoint, and correct me if I'm wrong here, from what I'm hearing, is to visually represent what the audience is hearing. Is that kind of what the initial goal is?
Yeah,
Yes.
And
yeah.
then
I would say.
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good.
Yeah, I was thinking. We also wanted for it to be like how we're all kind of born into the world, or how the world started with nothingness and just these random things that seemingly have nothing to do with each other
Being the
coming
shapes,
together,
right? Being
being
the
the shape,
shapes. Okay.
and then the shapes come together and mold themselves into different things throughout the entire show. So, um, the ethereal sounds and the shapes being all about the floor kind of represent that void or that nothingness, and then things coming together.
And then it builds from there. Quick
For
question
sure.
about the shapes. Did the members all choose their shape? Did they get to design it?
They did not get to design them, but we had a selection. We had a
Selection of
plethora.
options. Gotcha.
They pick
Gotcha.
them
Yeah.
out like,
Yeah.
I like
I was
this
just
one.
Some
curious
of
about
them.
that.
You know,
I want
visually,
the big one. I want the
there's
massive
several.
shape.
Yeah, the big one. It's like, yeah, I could imagine myself like when I was tying in high school. I want the biggest one that we have. But you know, the props themselves are all pretty individualistic in shape too, and they move. In what I took away from watching the show as they reshape and restage is an alignment with that kind of quote that the world around us does continuously reshape itself. That's also then like reshaping us. It's a symbiotic kind of circle of life moment that just keeps on clocking and keeps on ticking. And it takes a while too. The first real big build of the show takes a while to get into the first battery full ensemble like battery front moment. So Alex, kind of walk us through that. It feels like you chose to write it very segmental at the beginning.
Yes, yeah, certainly. And I think, every year is a little different. But we knew when we were putting this show together and talking with Chad and with Jamie, and we started to get these prop designs, and we made the decision, not to have a visual ensemble for United this year. Um, so knowing that and knowing like all the stuff we wanted to do, I knew that it was going to take a lot of bodies. So I tried to be really strategic about like I don't think the first full battery, like all segments playing at the same time happens until over 3 minutes, maybe getting closer
Three
to four
minutes
into the
and
show.
26 seconds, at least in the video I watched.
It's interesting you
So
say that too, because I texted Evan. I watched the show just to refresh myself like 20 minutes before we got on here, and I texted him and I was like, there's very few, it feels like, full battery moments throughout this. I wanted to make sure we asked you, was that intentional based on show design to have it be more segmental? Snare, I think it starts with the first moment's a quad moment, then it's snare, then I think a short cymbal thing, and then bass, and then I think we finally get to that 3 minute and 26 whatever second. So was that obviously? It seems like it was intentional.
yeah, well, and we knew how important it was, like you guys were talking about, to try and make the set evolve and to try and let basically the entire floor and the space reshape and to present things in different ways. And to me, that meant it was going to be really important not just to try and write um, awesome, interesting music for the battery as best as I can, but to also make sure that I was trying to be strategic about, okay, like if these five guys are doing this, then these six people could do this while these five people do this.
Mm-hmm.
So then we can set up so when this thing happens, we're good to go.
So there's a little bit of
Because we,
logistics baked in there. with the
Oh
props
my
and
gosh.
just like visually having to move stuff around. It's like, hey, we need 7 people to move this stuff to over here, so we need to write something to draw the audience focus to here with the snare line, for example, or interesting. So there's some logistics in there.
Well, and we ask a lot. Like every world group, every single WI group asks a lot of their members, but it's a lot to be like, okay, we are going to move every single set piece, and the same people playing the flam drags are the same people that are helping recraft the set, and they're the same people doing this, and we're asking that of every member of the ensemble. Yeah, and it definitely it takes a little bit of planning, just like you guys were saying.
Right, right.
I think it takes a lot of planning, and I think Alex did a good job. And we've all done shows where you have to reverse engineer stuff. You know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, like we got to get these props over there. Who's going to do it? Okay, they have to stop playing. You have to rewrite music. And I think Alex was very intentional as the director, but also as the battery arranger. Like, okay, what's going to have to happen visually, and who's going to do it? Okay, then if they're going to do that, who can play on some level? So from a design standpoint, there's a lot that's going on underneath logistically, for sure.
Well, I will say from moment to moment, kudos, because I've seen the show like 3 times total now at this point. I was never overly distracted by the set pieces moving around in the background. The show does a really good job of like, hey, look at the snare line, whether it's using lights to highlight it, whether it's whatever you all do visually to draw the audience's focus. It seems to have worked on me, at least. Like, I didn't notice the sets rearranging around everything around whatever the focal point was on the floor. So that was
an intentional secondary focus.
Yes.
That is one of the benefits of having the director also be the battery arranger, because normally there's a battle between the two of what needs to happen, and then when that's the same person, then those decisions can get gavelled in immediately.
I will double back to the segmental writing here in a second, just plugging it, because I'll be interested to hear like your writing philosophies or arranging philosophies and stuff. But I wanted to hop over to Tony, because sound design has become so integral, important. It's so important in modern marching, percussion, marching band, whatever it is. And a lot of that vibe can be created by the sound design. So obviously when we play quads or we play bass drum or even whatever percussion instruments, we're kind of limited in what we're able to do from a dynamic standpoint before it gets into a sound that is not great. But you can really supplement that and enhance it with so much sound design. So when you're getting the music from Iain and Alex, are you kind of going on the front end or the back end? Like, they've written this, they want this moment to kind of drive into this feeling and build an intensity, or are you creating a sound design on the front end that they're writing to?
Well, that's a great question, because that was kind of where we started with my involvement with it. Was I wanted to introduce the idea of kind of starting with the sound design, because to me that is where the storytelling has the most depth and dimension, because you're not limited to whatever sounds the quads make or whatever sounds the snares make or a marimba. Those are finite, even though these guys do a great job of breaking down some of those stereotypes and walls of creating new timbres. It's still a cylinder with mylar on it that's been tensioned down, and there's only so many sounds. But with sound design, you literally have the world. And to me, that's where you have the space to break out of that and bring in people who aren't necessarily enamored by what you have as design tools musically. And if I had to characterize it, I would say sound design is like the rendering that you get from an architect before the structure is built. Here's the concept of it. So we've been talking about this building. It's a cool building, and it has a chimney, and there's the 2 walls over here. But here's a thing you can look at. Here's a thing that you can act as a guide. So then from there, the framers can make a structure that looks like this, and then the interior decorator can go in and then furnish it based on that original concept. So starting with the sound design in a lot of cases helped us keep focus on the story we were trying to tell.
That's a really cool analogy. I liked what you did there with like the architecture and stuff. You see the image before the guy gets in there with like the AutoCAD and the engineering drafting. It's like, all right, now, well, this is how we craft this inch bolt to like make this building or this concept car that's just sleek before they get in. Like, all right, now what dimensions do we have to make that? I think that is a cool approach to keeping things in perspective. And then I'll do Alex first and then hop over to Ian. But like we talked about the segmental writing, I do feel like you guys have that East Coast vibe to you of a somewhat run and gun. It's not like that the whole time, or else, it would just lose its freshness. But I do feel like that segmental writing is beneficial to at least your writing style because you do like to, write some notes. So kind of take us through that some.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think like almost everything that I like learned about how to write, and I'm still learning so much every year and every kind of day in these experiences. But I went to UMass. I was in like the Panem school for like a number of years, and I was able to finish my education as a TA for him. And I worked really closely with Colin for battery writing. Those are two people that I really hugely look up to. But I think especially like that, I was thinking a lot about Panem, weirdly enough, doing this indoor show. I know that's not two words that we think of really like together.
Pick tips are great.
They
One
are
of the best sticks
amazing.
out there.
Yeah, they're super fantastic. But I was thinking a lot. One of the big things that he really tried to drill in to me, because I started writing at UMass a little bit, and I can't tell you guys how many times I'd like write a chart, and like the poor kids in the UMass drumline would like learn it. I was like handwriting it because I thought that was what I was supposed to do because that's whatever. But they would like they would learn the chart, and then Tom would hear them play it once and be like, "That ain't it." Sounds.
Oh, fellas, that ain't it.
He told me, yeah, he would say like, it sounds like drumline, and I said, okay, I'm gonna try it again and try and make it sound a little less like drumline. But I guess one thing that I was really thinking about doing this show in particular was just what the style of the music is and trying to write appropriately for that. Like what we do during Andy Akiho to walk or run, like that's a different kind of drumline, and I tried to write a little more with a little more angularity, a little more angst, and we can talk about how that maybe fits into the program overall. But I tried to write in a way that captured the essence of that music or my interpretation of that a little bit, and then if we have a little moment, in the sting tune that the snares have, that's a different moment, and especially the first circle stuff, being able to write that and trying to be a little more melodic in the treatment. But I tried to approach each block of the show as like, how can I service this music really well and the moments we know we want to create, and obviously writing material that pushes like the members, and that's providing them a really great experience. But that was more how I thought about it. The one thing that was really kind of free composed was that opening tenor moment where I kind of riffed on how Ian Moyer ended the that Oppenheimer, the gorgeous front ensemble feature, where we just end with that boom, boom that we kind of build to. And I wanted to kind of take that idea of just two notes and kind of mold it. You hear that in the sampling, you hear that in some of the anchor points for the tenor feature, but that was a little bit more free composed. But the rest of it is just trying to service the music and the moments that we wanted to create after that.
Small tangent, as you said, handwritten. I just got like, I won't call it PTSD because it's
that's what you were
highlight.
gonna do right now.
But like I still have my high school charts that are handwritten, the snare lines on the top, and we'd have to like go in and cut out the snare line and then just scotch tape it to a single piece of computer paper and then photocopy that, so we at least had all the parts on one page. But that's awesome. Handwritten is, man. If I write
how
for
did
5
I
minutes,
know that's what you were leaning over to pull out?
know.
As soon
I
as
just
you
had
leaned
it
over,
in
I was
there.
like, he's getting some handwritten sheets out.
But I'll hop over here to Ian. So, Ian, with your writing, do you typically pinpoint a single instrument first, like that you hear first, and then build around that, and then go back and adjust. Like, oh, I hear the vibes first here, and I'll build around that, or I hear the marimbas first, and I'll build around that. Front ensemble arranging to me is honestly mind blowing. It's like equates to full orchestra writing just because there's so many options you have as far as textures with mallet choice, as far as auxiliary instruments, drum set. I mean, so kind of what's your style there?
Sure. Yeah, I think more often than not, it's kind of figuring out what's the dominant voice, or what's the prevalent voice in a phrase of music, or a long segment of music, and what's driving it. And at times it's the marimbas, and I wouldn't say more often than not it's the marimbas, but I think there's times where it's certainly marimba driven, but then there's other times where it's like, okay, this is really all about the vibraphones, or this is about the metallics, and maybe not even. I like to think of woods versus metals, and just because then you can get other people into the party. From a wood standpoint, you've got marimba, you have xylophone, you have other percussion instruments. Metallics, you've got a whole host of things. You have vibraphone, you have bells, you have crotales, and all kinds of other things. So I think just kind of thinking about the nature of each musical phrase. Obviously the beginning of the show is really all about vibraphone, and it's fun to feature that instrument kind of soloistically. But when we get to we get to Fragile, kind of 3/4 of the way through the show, and it's really all about the marimbas for a while. Everybody just stops and we listen to the marimbas. So I think it's just about kind of choosing the right grouping of instruments for the musical moment, and then also not being afraid to play them at the same time and play them in combination and so on. And I think the phrase duality is something that I've always thought about, and I think really good front ensemble writing at times has great duality. You hear woods and metals doing unique things to complement each other, but not always the same thing at the same time. Sometimes the same thing at the same time, but there's things that vibraphones do great that marimbas do less great, and vice versa. So you just choose the instrument that kind of lets that speak for you in an appropriate way.
Makes sense. Just kind of like we were talking about with show design, what you hear first. I'm sure, obviously, like going with your gut, like, all right, let's lean into that first, and then if we have to like backtrack and reorganize later, but like, why fight what my gut and what my instinct is telling me? I think that makes total sense. Tony, earlier you mentioned a part of the show talking about like life and bringing life, which is ironic because there's a part in the show where it does mention, where is it at? I'm finding my, the world is constantly reshaping itself, constantly reshaping. There's like that acoustic guitar moment. We bring back those metallic sounds, the bowed vibes, kind of like the pitch bending, things layering over top of each other. But also there's the kind of the tripod props that you all use that I did say remind me of War of the Worlds, like those alien things, tripods that come down. But there's a moment where the members on the floor are interacting with them, and not to sound graphic, but I did think, I was like, this honestly reminds me of like a doctor birthing a child right now. And I don't know why I thought that, but I 100% have that in my notes, which is fine. But yeah, they're interacting with those, and I was like, this reminds me of like someone like, I don't know. And then they take the tripods and they reshape them on the floor together, so they all individually become one. Was that an intentional moment, or kind of take us through that crafting of like what that moment represents in your all's eyes?
Well, I think that moment was just a result of us ideating on what the story that the show was going to tell. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think it was Chad's idea to have like the kind of art pieces that are in there, and then Jamie kind of takes it from there of how they interact with each other and how they play out over time and reshaping in the various different expositions of that. But for me, from the the audio storytelling point from a narrative, was that I wanted the audience to discover over time with this show that the world is going to reshape, whether you like it or not. You're going to reshape, whether you like it or not. And there's two ways you can look at it. You can either be fearful of it and try to run from it and try to have avoid it, which is the path that personally I don't recommend, or you can embrace the reshape. And we talk about that towards the end. If you embrace the reshape, you can be a participant in the reshaping, not only the thing that reshapes you, but the how you are reshaped if you embrace it. And so when you get to that point as a co-creator of your own life, then the sky's the limit. And that's when we expand the world of the show. The shapes start to go out to the outer edges of the floor. When we started with this dense confined thing at the beginning, we create a world that is, seemingly infinite, or for as much as the parameters of UD Arena will allow us. And we really wanted to explore the X, Z, and Y axis of where those props are going, also the dimensionality of the sound design and the dimensionality of the musical composition. So that was just a result of how many avenues we had to go once the premise was set.
I think one thing you said. Go ahead, Alex.
I think that's all absolutely awesome. And in that moment, like that the Sting music that we're playing, we use a little bit of like soft lighting to help draw some focus. But that kind of specific spot that you guys were talking about, we have two soloists, really a duet going on our side one. We have some really fantastic choreography that's been put together by Mark Willis, who actually marched with the cadets a long time ago. He's a professional dancer in New York City, so he graces us with his presence, and it's really awesome to see his take. But when you're looking at that kind of Sting portion of the show, hopefully what you can start to see is we have these two people interacting and almost a little bit like the montage from Up, but we wanted to try and show some of these scenes in a little bit of an abstract way of like how two people are shaping each other, how they affect each other, what that's like to be connected to someone, if it's a close friendship, if it's familial, if it's a relationship, whatever, but what that closeness is like. And then all of the other people on side two, with those metal props, our original idea was like, they're almost like the thought bubble. Like we shrink the props really down low and have these two humans interacting with each other on the side one front. And the representation of that on the other side of the floor is almost what could be going on in someone's mind as they're shaped. Like the prop is their partner. The prop is that other person shaping them. And that was part of that. I guess really the visual idea behind the ballad. Can we set up a thought bubble to express a really intimate moment between two people shaping each other?
Yeah, in both of those ideas, like Tony, you said, like run away from it versus like accept it. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, prior to that like guitar moment and what you're talking about, those people connecting, was that quote where it talked about like technology and how we created technology to like grow close, but in reality it's more divisive than anything. It's almost like saying that, as humans we tend to like create our own destruction at times.
Was
so
that
like
more...
you have
No,
Go ahead, Mike.
finish. No, finish.
Well, I was just going to say, like, we go through that technology. Sorry, I'm trying to find a quote that I wrote down, but that's all right. Our own creations, our own destructive devices. And like you have this conflict, there's like that snare moment. It's kind of like aggressive and angular. And then we move into this like, oh, maybe we shouldn't fight this, and maybe we shouldn't run away from it, and maybe we shouldn't but we have to accept certain things, like what Tony was just saying. Not swimming upstream, as I've said like 3 times on this already, but whatever, it's fine. I'm gonna run with it.
Very appropriate though.
So, but yeah, you have this image then of resolution to where we're like,
before you move forward,
Yeah.
let me pause so we don't get too far away from this question. The technology quote, is that more directed at social media? Because that's the way I took it watching it. It was more because obviously we've heard podcasts talk about it. Everyone in society, like social media is supposed to be this thing that brings us together, but it really has over time caused a lot of divides to grow wider. Was that at that or just technology broader?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
And when we first started talking about things that shaped us, Chad brought to the table was like technology was is the thing that, you know, has shaped us the most in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really thought going down that path would be great, but the first thing I said, I was like, man, we can't do the thing where we have it can't be another iPhone show. I was like, I've written so many of those that is just, I was like, you want to see a collective eye roll from the audience. If we do this once, it'll be over. We'll be
Done.
canceled.
Brains turned off. They've moved on.
Right. So I thought was like,
Download this app, be a part of the show.
yeah. What if we got Steve Jobs to narrate the show, and that's whose voice that is, Steve Jobs.
Oh, dang.
Really?
Now, the choice was, do we inform people of that, or do we keep it an Easter egg? And I felt like the moment we say something or bring an image of Steve Jobs, then it becomes the Steve Jobs show, and then we go off course.
Right.
So it kind of became an Easter egg of like, if people figure that out, if we put it out in the universe and they know it, fine, but we don't want it to be a Steve Jobs show, and we don't want it to be a technology show. It's a component of the show.
Right.
So obviously Steve Jobs is not available to do it. So I went in and got
Please say AI.
I did an AI engine of Steve Jobs' voice, and I used the Worldwide Developers Conference where he introduced the iPhone as the sample of it to create the engine for it. Side note, my daughter was born the day that Steve Jobs acknowledged that they were developing an iPhone. I remember holding my child for the first hours, and then there's a TV, and then I was like, child, or hear about this iPhone. I was torn. That's a whole story.
Don't let her hear that.
Yeah, she's heard. She already knows. Anyways,
What was that, 2006, 2007?
2007, January 16th, 2007, Steve Jobs acknowledges that they're working on a thing called the iPhone.
Oh man, like that's one of the rare times. I still don't feel like I'm old, but like that's a rare time that like,
yeah.
oh man,
And that
your
keeps
daughter
happening, by the way.
your daughter was born the year I graduated high school, and like,
Yeah.
now she's like an MCM, and you're trying to beat her.
Yeah, us too. So yeah, and so the challenge was to create words that fit the show as if Steve Jobs said those words. So I did a deep dive and just listening to things that he has said in the past and trying to craft that respectfully, and posthumously bring him to life in this production. And he's one of my heroes of all times, and the reverence of trying to be in the space of making sure that it's not, hey, look at this bag that I wanted to be very respectful about that and making sure that it was honored in a way that was representative of his life.
Yeah, they don't. None of the quotes come across as like, forced, which is great.
Yeah.
And the Steve Jobs thing is a great Easter egg. I mean, I did not pick up on that.
I did not either.
I've also not watched every Steve Jobs keynote. I've watched a couple of them, but I do remember when the iPhone came out. So revolutionary. But that kind of brings us full circle. Like, we're talking about all these things in the show that reshape us and impact us and how we are as individuals, and then it just continues to evolve. And one of the last quotes of the show is like, "Oh, we almost forgot like the shape of things to come." So I think it's cool because that quote reminds me of like an open-ended movie where the credits roll and you're like, wait, what happens? Because you don't know. The story's not written. Like, you don't know if this character is going to go do this, or do they resolve, or is the conflict figured out? Is there justice? Like, it kind of reminds me of that vibe, just because the future is not written. Was that kind of and I'll pass this to Alex, was that kind of like what you wanted to do at the end? Like, hey, we don't want to have a resolution from like a conceptual standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's a marriage of two things. So like being able to arrange and bring like Pat Metheny's First Circle music is super impactful to me. And I think the music itself is really inspiring and uplifting. And we knew we wanted to bring everything together as, like I said before, a celebration of our memberships and really everyone that's going to be at UD Arena together experiencing what's coming next. So we felt like the music gave a lot of weight to that, that the feeling was right, and that using those words in that way was the right inspiring touch without, I guess, kind of bashing everyone over the head with something that's like incredibly super literal, I guess. But I think how those things tied together, I'm really happy with how that ended up. But when you marry, like, okay, it's the giant climactic ending of First Circle with this idea of, okay, the shape of things to come, and here we go, it does kind of propel us into the future. That's definitely what we were going for.
And if I might tag on to that, another Easter egg is Steve Jobs' famous tagline whenever he introduces the next big thing. If you go back and watch the Apple Pod, when they introduce the iPad, the iPhone, the Mac, whatever, the whole thing goes along and it seems unremarkable, and right at the end he goes, wait, there's one more thing, and then it's like life-changing technology. So I thought it was appropriate to end the show that way, that we use Steve's famous tagline.
I think too, like when we were working on First Circle, like the end of the show, we were trying to figure out. I know Tony was like, "Well, what's the end of the show about?" You know, and to me, I'm just like, "Okay, we're playing First Circle. This is going to be great. I love First Circle. I can't wait to arrange it. It's going to be awesome." And then Tony's like, "Well, what's it about?" And he kind of had to come. To be honest with you, you were asking like, who writes first? Where does it go? Does the sound design start? You know, does the sound design lead the way? And that's absolutely a moment where the sound design led the way. We had like the pieces and the parts to First Circle. I had written some stuff. Alex had written some stuff. And Tony said, hang on, I'm going to take this and let me just see if I can do something with it. And, you know, he crafted it. He sent me the file and sent Alex the files. That's it. All right, we're good. Like, good job, you know, just because he was the message, and the audio design is the message, particularly towards the end of a show like this. So,
I mean, I love those things where there's those layers. I think a show is great when it does two things. One, when it shows you things literally, and then obviously two, when it shows you things in a layered or more sophisticated or intrapersonal way, you know, where you can connect with it like, oh, I see exactly what you're doing, but also like it takes its own meaning to me as a judge or a spectator or a viewer, and I can insert myself in my life experience into what that is. So those different facets really create a connection that I think help generate and create a good program. Yeah,
I mean, I
just
feel like
love
if you
them
go
both.
back and look at a lot of the finishing or placing shows, or when groups have had standout years for where they historically are when they find that sweet spot. There's tons of shows that we've all watched an indoor drumline show where it ends and you go, I have no clue what that was about. But everything's under the surface. There wasn't enough of that surface level stuff to grasp onto. But then we've also watched shows where it's all surface level and you're like, okay, cool. Drums in a gym, angry, whatever. And there's not that second level below the surface. So to me, that's what you need to shoot for. So I totally agree.
So all in all, and I'll kind of leave it to you guys too for some final thoughts, but the shape of things to come, the world impacts us, you know, who we surround ourselves with as far as our friends, our family, our community, our culture. I mean, that all impacts us just as much as anything else does, but also, you know, it can change at the drop of a hat. You can move locations, you can change jobs, you can change, I don't know, family, you can marry into a family. Like everything changes what you experience, and then it just sets you on a whole new collision course down a new pathway. So yeah, I mean, we'll leave like the red carpet out for you guys too, as far as like anything else that you feel like we haven't touched on that you're trying to say through the product, or that you hope that people get from United Percussion 2024.
I think I know I've used this word a couple times, but and I hope that everyone we're at UD or when we're together and doing all the stuff that they can feel through all the groups, everyone in prelims, semis, finals, but that we're celebrating what we're all doing together in the hurdles, that every group and every person that like gets out actually like make it to be in that place together. Like the people overcome a lot to get here, and I certainly think, speaking for our members of United Percussion this year, it's really like a celebration of them. Some of them have been around the group since before the pandemic happened, and moving through, and just it's a really awesome opportunity to get to create something for them and craft it and be really hands on and help them grow and navigate. And certainly, like I always think about writing, it's kind of like getting a suit to me, where it's like, okay, like you get like a fancy suit, you can have like nice material, but then you still got to make sure the sleeves are the right length, and you got to do this, and you got to get the shirt that matches. You're always customizing and molding it to the people that we have and what they make it become, because they're the ones that are doing it at the end of the day. So that's the biggest thing. I hope it can be a celebration of those people out there doing it.
Hell yeah.
I'd tag onto that and say, I really think that, the musicality and the artistry that's happening in WGI percussion these days is really, really, really high level. And I remember watching maybe like color guard finals maybe 10 years ago, and I was like, whoa, like this is like super artistic. And I think the percussion has evolved to that, and I think everybody's doing great work, and I think everybody respects their colleagues. And sure, it's a competition, and at the end of the day somebody wins, etc., so on, but I think everybody has, the community that's created through artistic pursuit in the marching arts is a really, really cool and unique thing, and it's an awesome thing to be a part of, and for the members to be a part of it and then grow into staff members and designers is a wonderful thing, and it's a really unique opportunity to have from an educational youth-based activity.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Dope.
Anybody else got anything?
Yeah, I guess for me, I wanted to say thanks to these guys and the United family for, I guess I was the most outlier of joining the team, but it's been a great experience for me being able to bring some things that I've learned throughout the years into the United universe. As far as appreciating the show, this is one of the rare times where the show that you're thinking of in the beginning becomes the show that's on the floor, and that's a win to me. When you can keep that amount of focus throughout a design process, because there's so many, much like shapes, it can mold the show into different pathways, and then it just, I call them Franken shows, where they just wind up. I was like, oh, that's where the snare guy got his say, or that's where the cymbal tech got their say, and then it winds up not speaking as one voice. I hate using the word art because it feels cringe sometimes to say that. Because when I think of an artist, I think of a Van Gogh or Da Vinci or something like that. But it's like, oh, we're wearing space pajamas in a gym playing drums.
Space pajamas in a gym.
But it's, I really feel strongly about inviting the people who will experience this in UD to take it as a living piece of art, and to me, become participants in it. Because one of the best parts of a show, and especially this one, is when the audience can also become a part of the design, and they can infuse their own experiences within the show and have it play out over time. And so I can identify that with that. It's not, my situation isn't exactly that, but the concept of it is. And that to me is when you have something special. And I think we do have something special.
I don't know of a better way to end this thing. That was well said. All right,
Dude,
everybody.
Special. It's going to be special. I'm excited for you guys. I'm excited for WGI finals in general. Just on a personal podcast level, Mike and I have a couple left in us before we get to finals, our highly anticipated predictions podcast. that everybody keeps messaging about. But
I love throwing darts
just so
against
they
the
can be
dartboard.
mad at whatever we say, which is fine. But
yeah.
you know, again,
Thank you,
I want to
guys.
extend a kudos to the United staff, and you know, we're missing some people that are very important as far as the visual design team. Chad, Jamie, Zach, Ian, Hale. Shout out Ian. Love spending 2 summers with Ian, and all those guys. The tech staff, obviously, everything it takes to make an indoor program run. It's a lot of moving parts, but we want to extend thanks to you guys for being gracious enough to sacrifice some time with us and just hopefully share some wisdom with our viewers and our listeners.
Yep. So
Thank you,
2
guys.
things. Thank you all. First, 3 things. Thank you to all 3 of you. Secondly, comment, like, subscribe, share it. And lastly, you got to plug ourselves here at the end for the 10 people still watching 100%
they're
viewer
in
retention.
They're in there.
But go watch their show. As soon as you're done watching this, I've done this with every single design staff that we've sat down with it in whether it's the next morning or that night when I'm done getting the video ready for the next day. I go watch the show and I immediately like it 10 times more. Like just because I understand more. It can be hard to grasp those under the surface things till you hear it kind of walked through like this. Highly recommend go watch it to get a whole new appreciation for the show. Thank you all once again. Patreon, you all join button, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. And we'll see everybody in the next one.
Peace.
Peace.